Well, here we are again. I'm Bill Carell, and this is Lighting the Candle, A World That Works. Each week we get together and we toss some linguistics out and have a lot of fun dissecting, hooking up, defining, comparing, contrasting, all those other things. And the end goal with all of our friendships is to be inspired and to inspire our listeners and to remind you that the future is really, really worth fighting for and winning. Okay. Your future is worth fighting for and winning. So we're here to give you a little bit of energy and maybe wind in your sails and maybe some peace and quiet if that's what you need more than any action. So with that said, I'm going to introduce my, actually, I'll have them introduce themselves. But today, I'd like to kick off talking about and thinking of the difference between what you believe and what you take a stand for. Did I say that in a proper way, Jan?
Yeah.
Okay. Would you like to introduce yourself and then we'll go around the horn? And if you'd
Sure.
like to make a couple of comments about it as you're going, that'll be very helpful.
Okay. I'm Jan Jeremias. So I'm doing a mentorship um, with two people, and that was our topic of conversation of last Thursday was um, a belief versus what we stand for. And the way I had just read an essay written by someone, and she was saying, which I kind of totally resonated with, that what you stand for is something like you're willing to actually stand up and make a stance and say something or act upon it, versus a belief which might be a little bit, in her mind, was a little bit more passive. And so that's the way I took it, but I'm very interested to hear what you people have to say about it.
And we'll pass it over. Thank you. We'll pass it over to Ken.
Hi, I'm Ken. No, um, yeah,
Well, you have been for most of the time I've known you.
pretty much. I don't know. Maybe I'll change my name at some point. Actually, it was a funny side story, but I helped out in a martial arts school years ago, and I'd go out there and just kind of help them get things back on track for a couple of months. And I had all the kids convinced that my name was Melvin, and just because it was fun, and and there are a few that were in and knew that that was not my name. And for years after, I'd run into kids who are now grown up, and they would say, "Hey, Melvin," so it was just really funny. So yeah. um yeah, so I guess the thing that strikes me as a belief, well, I guess I can only speak personally. Something that I stand for is an immutable bedrock value, um upon which I've built my life. And it's the thing that I'll let things break against, or it will break me, but I'm not gonna bend on that. Whereas beliefs are impermanent, because they're only as good as the information that I currently have, which is incomplete. So, so it's interesting. I mean, you can believe something to be true, and at some point it might behoove you to rethink that when faced with new information or the potential for a new paradigm, you know. Um, but whereas what you stand for are those, your core, your values, that they may change how they express themselves, but they're going to be true for you in the way you live your life, however long that may be. So I guess that's my thoughts on
I like it. And this is one of those conversations where you can't get it wrong. You know,
it.
it is totally an I say phenomenon.
Yeah, yeah, that's
I
why I
say
said from my
follow
perspective alone.
100%. That's called being an awake person where you can be responsible for your future speaking, and I appreciate that. So, Lisa,
Well, according to the screen, and I'm sure you all see the same, but I am you, YOU, on my screen. That's how it identifies me.
no,
Oh,
it
that's
says Lisa. Mine's
So what does
mine
it say
says
for
you,
yourself? What does
and
it say for
Jan's
yourself?
probably says you, and Ken's probably says you.
Exactly.
on their
So
screen.
that leads me to we are all you and we are all one.
I love it. That's one of my favorites.
So that is why so I'm torn between whether that's both belief and what I stand for. And the other thing that came to mind is how like beliefs are kind of created from your environment and who you're around. So that I think for me is why it's constantly changing. And then when I read something like you said, Jan, that resonates and it hits me right to the core of my being. So that becomes like a belief I can stand for kind of thing. But I've also been raised not to speak out, so I have a hard time standing up to something and that's changing too. So that's my opening.
There's still time for you, Lisa. That's the good news. I love this on many different levels, and I think it's um, it's an opportunity for everyone where you are in your life, what your past has been, what you want your future to be, to just look at the malleableness and the fluidity of language and linguistics. Because each one of the things that we're saying, and I'll have some things to say in a minute, neither corroborates nor invalidates what anybody else is saying, because this is a personal perspective, kind of a thing. And the interesting part to me is that I guess the better trained we are, the more we think we ought to know what these two things are. And what if this is where the discovery is, where this curiosity going forward to the next step actually allows you to have some breakthroughs in your relationship with everything. So, for example, what if I toss out there that the definition of what you would make a stand for is what you'd at least be willing to speak in favor of, at a very minimum. And if somebody asked you at some point, this, are you for this or not for this? That you would actually say, I've given it some thought. It's my choice to be for this, and I choose to be for it. Now, would you go out and raise money or go across the world to feed hungry people or all that sort of thing? I think that's a continuum of actions that a person who's made a stand, like for the end of hunger in the world, that either you are acting, as Lisa said, I'm thinking about it. It's present for me. I will engage other people in conversations, but I might not get on a boat and go to a third world country and you know contract malaria and die. That probably won't be what I'm going to do. Okay, so belief is really insidious because most people believe they know what belief means, right? Right, Montoya. So the whole notion of a belief, most people think they know what they believe. Well, they know a little bit about it, but what they say and what they articulate, and a lot of it has to do with where they come from with regard to a particular domain, like religion or sex or money or athleticism or any of those. These all things come out of you, the ones that you've thought about and made your choice to. But the real important beliefs are the ones you don't know you have. You don't know that you don't know you believe something. And there's actually a litmus test to find out those areas where you're really belief stricken. And I use it in that language for a particular reason. Whenever you come up against a situation or a set of words that were strung together by somebody else that you have a reaction to in a very, very strong way, either for or against, it's not a belief that you know you have, it's just how it is. Wherever you have this is how it is, like so many people talk about how bad the world is, and people always, when you start using that kind of language, those folks they're not awake to the fact that what they're talking about is what they believe. What's coming out of their mouth is a string of their beliefs that's either empowering them to do great things in the world or limiting them. Limiting beliefs, the ones that you don't know you have, are the ones they're undistinguished, and they're absolutely the ones that keep many people from getting out of bed every day. because they believe they know what bad things are going to happen to them today. And what does anybody really know? And when does anybody ever say, well, why do I have that belief? I don't think we would name that as a belief, right? If you have a fear, it's a belief that's causing you to have that fear. But it's also an undistinguished belief, which is not a good thing. So, like in coaching, those, you know, disturbing thoughts that you have that we call, bad program or whatever you want to refer to it as, but they're usually mind distortions, thought distortions. They're a belief that you have that you've heard other people say, and then you repeat 40 to 60,000 times in your mind in a month, and you don't realize that's just how it is. So I've expanded from taking a stand as something you're taking a stand for. Yes, it's a decision. There's some action. I stand for the end of hunger in this generation. That's something that everyone can say. And I bet you most people would put their hand in the air and say, yes, I stand for that too. But for people to say, this is what I believe, I would come back with, I believe that's what you believe you believe. I'm not sure you have any clue what you actually believe.
Or what they mean by standing for something. I mean, you could say that all you want, but what are your actions to support that stance?
I think that there's an acid test to standing for something as well. And you know that people who have been crucified in the past actually stood for what they got crucified for, in some cases. There were a lot of people who kept their mouth shut and their head down. And although they thought they stood for something, they hid out. Didn't see the value in having their life be over because of a sentence that was going to come out of their mouth. So if you take it back to a situation, and I'm sure, Jan, that the context of where you heard this was situational, right? That were they referring to a group situation, possibly in an institution or like a school or among your friends? Where would you say the context of the conversation lives?
No, the context of the conversation was very much individual. Like, what do you stand for?
Yep.
And versus, that's where it was. And I was thinking about what everybody said. And for me, it's almost like what you said. For me, is what I stand for is like, I feel it in my gut. It's just like, this is, for me, this is, if I talk about truth, this is what I base like my truth on.
Yeah.
Is this, is this feeling where belief is so much more, for me, let's say, governed by what other people have told me, possibly.
Yeah, there's more of an adopting other points of view with believing, isn't there?
Yeah, but also like on a negative and a positive of what I believe about myself, you know, being colored by what I've been told through the years, as opposed to what I stand for. People could tell me whatever they want, but it's not going to matter
Sure.
because, it's part of who I am.
Yeah. So when you think about it, using the Covey model where the compass pointing north, I think it's a good metaphor for when you know that true north is in a particular direction. You can be very distracted. You can lose sight of your compass for a while, but sooner or later, true north is true north. And if you're in a conversation where somebody's telling you it's not, you can not have to buy what they're selling. You know what I mean? And making a decision about taking a stand is clearly something that may have started out by coming up against your belief. That this is not something that we're going to put up with anymore, and I'm going to do something about it. Sort of thing. And the whole point of saying what you believe, as Ken said, that those are transient, they get upgraded, they disappear, new ones come in. And the neat part of it is, how often do you have somebody say something that they totally, absolutely are sure is factual, and then are open for it not to be so. Turns out that's not the truth. I mean, have any of you ever experienced that where you argue with somebody 2 or 3 minutes and then finally go, what if I'm wrong? Why was I so adamant about this having to be the fact? Well, I'll turn myself in. I've done that once or twice in 68 years.
I think that's how you learn to not do that.
Yes.
Like you'll make a statement and go, well, wait a minute,
Yeah.
I thought it was that way, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, and it sounds like almost like a cop out, but I think it's more of coming to terms with the fact that you don't know everything. And like Ken was saying, the how, and you were saying how beliefs change, as we've talked about all aspects of life too, is like as we age, you're getting rid of things that were layered upon you that you suddenly, or slowly begin to realize they don't agree with your core beliefs. That finally that's being uncovered, and I think that's like the beauty of life is like when you discover those that are your north. So just as you were saying, Bill.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of value just really in asking the questions. It doesn't feel like the answers are as relevant. It's, because it causes you to pierce the illusions that we create or that are created for us and look a little bit more deeply. And I always come back to what my mentor would always say. He'd say, just keep asking bigger and bigger questions, bigger and better questions until the questions disappear and the answer reveals itself, then ask another question. So, and I think that, I've noticed that in these kind of conversations, when I've had them, the tension comes, it seems to me anyway, when the questions stop being asked genuinely and you get into some kind of an emotional state of defensiveness or frustration or whatever it is, and then you become fixed, which is why I don't have like really like conversations about what I stand for. I don't do them on social media at all. It's not healthy or helpful for anyone. But individually, I've had some pretty fiery debates to the point of even hanging up on each other and cooling down and then coming back to it. It was awesome, and and it was just it was all in challenging, and in that challenging and in that kind of battle, you learn some things if you can stay open to it. And often I found myself coming out of it is that what do I value? What are my values? And sometimes what I thought was my value was I just peeled back another layer and found out there was something deeper and clearer. And and over time it just gives you a sense of just kind of certitude, which is kind of interesting. So
Yeah. There's a kind of a neat aphorism in the whole world of law of attraction, and that is, what you argue for, you get to keep. And so what comes out of your mouth as the truth, as how things are, whether if it limits you or empowers you, again, it's front of the hand, back of the hand. It can do either of those things or be neutral. And when you're speaking and what comes out of your mouth is a justification or truth table or some kind of a theorem that proves that something is correct or not correct, the right thing to do is to have that kind of like, can I remove myself from this conversation and stand over there like a friend of Bill and ask, what are you arguing for? Is this one of those it matters who's right as opposed to what's right mattering, And I think the really kind of neat thing is, you mentioned before, Ken, about staying open. That's an extraordinary human being who actually can set aside, we're about to talk about something that I may believe in, I mean, I don't know a lot of people that are that awake, that basically, if I'm feeling tension, if I'm feeling upset, if I'm feeling really overjoyed and happy that I'm hearing the same thing coming out of this stranger that I've never met before, yikes, that might just be reaffirming, or bringing up one of the things I believe in, and I don't know that that's a belief and not necessarily a fact. I'll give you an example. I saw a meme this week, which I thought was really cool. When I was 20, I was very concerned about what other people were thinking about me. When I was 40, I didn't care what other people were thinking about me. And when I was 60, I realized they never were thinking about me.
Yeah.
I mean, how freeing would that be to teach an 18-year-old whenever you're having a thought conversation in your head about what other people are thinking about you? Shut up. They're really just not that interested. So what I love about this on the stand side, I mean, there's the Stephen King stand where you marshal all the forces of good against the forces of evil and you meet in Las Vegas. Or there's just being in a hard conversation. And Jan, I keep thinking about, what you were saying, giving space or holding space for someone or something, a conversation, or for how a person needs to just kind of work something through on their own. I think that's a really good example of taking a stand. And I don't know how many people are that adept or skilled with holding space for someone else, but I think that's a really that's a talent I think that's worth putting some time and effort into.
Hey, the other thing I was thinking about is this past weekend was my nephew's bar mitzvah.
Oh
So
no.
yeah, so everybody's getting around up, and or a lot of people are getting up. I mean, it's Orthodox, so only men got up, but I won't go there. You know? And
No female rabbis in your church.
no female anything, like
Yeah, I
everybody,
get it.
like so but people were describing him, and as I was listening to what people were saying, I thought, like, as we're sitting here and we're talking about, like, some of those, I wonder if you were to ask him, because what people said, like, of the, let's say, of his positive qualities or traits, I wondered, I was just sitting here trying in my head right now of how much of that is actually what he stands for. And could, like, if we looked at everybody kind of like that, like, took their positive qualities and said, okay, what is that telling about them? And what they, not necessarily, because beliefs, like we said, are from, usually might be influenced by outside sources. So if you think about standing for being much more action oriented, just by looking at someone's qualities, what would that tell you about what they stand for?
I'll tell you what, my own particular bias having to do with bar and bar mitzvahs is, I think it's an extremely powerful example of being both and, where it's not only, this beautiful soup of tradition and beliefs, but it's also a community taking stand for a young person who then is taking a stand for the community. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about the bar mitzvahs and bar mitzvahs that I've attended. Very, very. All I can ever think is Baruch. That we all Baruch is Hebrew for blessed or blessed, and there's a very special relationship in a coming of age situation like that. We have it with Native Americans. We also have it, in the Spanish community and the Catholic community going through confirmation. And if you stop and think about it, and what a lovely thing for you to share and for me to kind of like jump on top of and embellish. I think it just put me in a space of finding out that I believe that communities are supposed to stand for their children and that children are supposed to stand for their communities. That's as good as I can come up with on short notice.
Well, I like the fact that too, like that those, especially what you were saying, Jan, at those ceremonies that you point out to people your perspective on the person being honored, And sometimes hearing those words is so beautiful and enlightening and
Yeah.
inspiring for the individual to hear back, and how that could motivate them to stand for what you see in them too. And then I was reminded how we should, or I thought came to me how we should do that throughout people's lives too. I was talking with someone who's about to turn 75, and I said, well, a friend of mine, when she turned 65, she had a crone ceremony, and it was a big circle, and everybody took their turns and said what they thought about that person and what their attributes and how they met them, but how they inspired, how that person inspired them. And I thought, God, we should probably do that more often instead of just once when we were teenagers. you know
Well, one of the things we had to do was we had to, with this mentorship, is we had to contact 5 people that we knew and ask them to give us 3 qualities of us and send it back to us. So very similar to what you're saying, Lisa, is we had to, I had to ask 5 people. It was kind of interesting to hear what
Yeah.
they thought of me, or, or what they shared about me.
Yeah, that's cool.
It's an interesting thing, Have you ever tried meeting somebody you haven't seen for quite a long time and really, like the first thing that comes out of your mouth is, I'm so glad to see you again. Do you know what I love about you? What kind of conversation do you think comes after that opening sentence? Authentically sharing whatever it is that you love about another human being, because we all can find something that we love about. I mean, might not say that to the governor, but I don't know him that well. However, there are a lot of people, local politicians, and if Jody Rell were here, I'd walk up to her and I'd give her a hug and I'd say, Jody, what I love about you, and I could go on for a long time.
Well, that comes to mind, like, before it's too late. Everybody's always saying that, and I've been reminded of that in big situations this past month.
Yeah.
Dealing with maybe not seeing some people in the near future, kind of thing, and how that would help to say something like that before you don't see them again. And and people have said that all the time, and but I have a friend facing a horrible cancer diagnosis, and because she's my exact age, it's kind of opening my eyes too, and because, well, anyway, it's becoming closer and more apparent that I need to say these things more often, because I also had a brilliant interaction with my dad, who just got over back surgery, and I don't know if it was the relief or whatever of coming, just being home and knowing he'd come out of it, but he broke down in front of me, and I mean, my entire life he's never done that. So I was probably the most vulnerable I've ever been with him, but that made me feel really good that we got to that discussion and could release some things that had been being held for so long.
Yeah, and you're almost pointing to, you neither have to say I believe nor I take a stand for or I stand for. When your true authentic self comes out, that's what's happening, in my opinion. I mean, you aren't being careful about what you say any longer, and the vulnerability, and also the strength in allowing the other person space to be vulnerable as well, and that whole created little thing of trust going on. And like you said, for many people, the first time in their lives,
It felt like a bubble. Yeah, it felt like a bubble. I was in this safe bubble, safe, vulnerable bubble, if that could be, happen at the same time, which it can. So that was cool.
Yeah, and I didn't say this, Jan, but I've been to exactly 3 Jewish weddings in my life and 4 bar mitzvahs, next door neighbors and friends of next door neighbors that my kids went to school with. And I don't know what I thought. I mean, this is another thing. What did I believe about, how a Jewish ceremony was conducted? What religion was like? And holy mackerel, It's just like this amazingly loving ceremony with people again just being real with each other in a different language, albeit, but definitely a room full of people smiling and full of pride for their community, full of pride for everyone in that room, full of pride for the 12-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought that Jewish weddings were like Jewish weddings and actually Jewish funerals. There's something really pure. It's the only word I can think of. Like really, just I don't know. Like there is a and pure. I would have to think about the word pure in the right way, but there's some sort of simplicity and like I mean the fact that according to really a religious Jewish, you're buried in a pine box that's literally a wood box. Like there's
Yeah.
no embellishment, there's no, nothing, and you're buried in a white shroud. There's no, you're not buried in, they don't bury in favorite outfits or whatever. There's just this, almost in, whatever, however you want to believe. There's this real holiness to the whole thing, or sacredness is maybe
Yeah.
maybe a better word for it. That happens.
I also think that the bar mitzvah is of the same ilk, where it's about stripping things down to the bare minimum. There's a ritual to it, and people get dressed up. Yes, that's true, and they wear robes and stuff. But at the same time, as you're mentioning, I've not been to a funeral, which I've seen them in movies, but I've been to, like I said, the weddings that I've been to, and I really enjoy that how simple it is, especially the words that are spoken back and forth to each other. It's a very simple, ritualistic, fun thing that ends up with a glass being smashed
Mm-hmm.
underfoot, and you've
But they
given me
don't, but just for your affirmation, they don't use a glass most of the time.
well, see, we wouldn't know that. I mean, I wouldn't know that.
Or they're very careful of the glass they choose because you want to make sure it's the guy doesn't the person doesn't
The
hurt
maximum
himself.
noise with the least opportunity for an accident. Huh?
Right, exactly.
You've given me goosebumps 3 times today, Jan. Thank you. So Ken, for someone who hasn't examined belief systems, how it is, any of that sort of thing at a fundamental level, we can go back and talk about your experience with 5-year-olds who are as close to a tabula rasa or a blank slate as human beings can get and still have a meaningful interaction. The 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds are a lot of fun, but I don't think they're all that interested in us, if you know what I mean. It takes me work, to engage a 3-year-old. I have to go out on a limb and play a caricature for a while. So what do you think a 5-year-old is waiting for with regard to both what's important in life and what are the things that they believe? Because we ask them questions about that sort of thing all the time and don't realize it. You know what I mean? Just in conversation.
But I think they're actually, I mean, there's I think it's probably Tibetan, but it's a reminder to view the world filled with eyes filled with childlike wonder.
Yes.
And a 5-year-old has the thing that we all forget that we also have, which is curiosity. So so I think the challenge is giving them space to be curious without trying to give them answers, while at the same time providing them the structure that allows them to safely explore their curiosity, because they don't know what they don't know. So so we've seen many 5-year-olds that in their mind they're perfectly capable but they'll break an arm, and just not knowing, so it's finding a way to, you got to give them banks to the river. And having watched, actually, it's very interesting watching, for some parents, their center of gravity is more towards let them figure it out, chicks dig scars type thing. Like, their kids are always coming in bruised or, scraped up. They let them. And then others who, kind of bubble wrap their kids. And it's just, every parent is somewhere in that spectrum, and they kind of fluctuate depending on how many kids they have and circumstances, all that kind of stuff, how safe they feel and how safe they feel their kids are. But, I think for us, the thing to remember is the gateway to all of this is just allowing yourself to be curious and nurturing that within yourself, so that when you have you have a strong reaction to one of your beliefs being challenged, or something you're convinced is true, and it triggers you in some way, can you just be curious enough to say, that's an interesting response I just had. What is that? Right. And, and, and you don't even have to, I think it's hard because we're all kind of conditioned to, for validation, there's judgment, there's all those things that cloud that. And if you don't have good models of people who find balance in service to that, you don't know what you don't know. Going all the way back, we all have ignorance all the time. That's
Yes.
not a bad thing. It's a human thing, so, but at the same time, you can't be paralyzed and say, well, I don't know everything, so I shouldn't do anything. But yeah, I think it's just really it feels like it always comes back to curiosity as the gateway.
I completely agree with you. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I completely agree with you. And having said that, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, the last few conversations that I've had with children, actually, the most recent one with a 3-year-old, his name is John. And the conversation usually goes like, here, you want to try my truck? Or whenever I see him, it's like, what the what? And then we're both engaged, and he's, what the what, back at me. And every time I see him, the first 2 times that I saw him, it took him a while to warm up to me. And then I saw him like 3 times in a week. And now we go over to Asian Bistro, and he's there with his mom. I come through the door, and they both come over and give me a big hug. And the first thing out of his mouth is, what the what? So I told you that story to tell you this one. And it seems to me, when you're talking to kids that age, what comes out of their mouth is one of 2 things. It's either a question, or it's a statement of fact that they're saying, but they heard it from somebody else, usually from an adult. And it'll come out something like, so what are you doing? And it'll either have the disclaimer, my mom says, or it'll just be, I'm too loud. It's the quiet part that doesn't get said out loud that stays with us for the rest of our life as we take that programming forward. And it's years later in therapy for a lot of people that they start to look into that with somebody who's a good listener and start to challenge whether you really are too loud. And as in recent history, with most people who thought they were really loud, they're typically not. They're typically very quiet.
Just an interesting thing. I did it just reminded me. I did this little. I've been experimenting on children for a long time. Don't take that the wrong way, but
good way. Yeah.
We did this thing where we had it was just in a martial arts class with pretty sure they were all like 4 and 5 in that range, and I had a blue pad and a red pad, and I'd ask them, they were going through and they got to like karate chop them. They were all excited. So the first time through, I asked them blue or red or blue, right? And about 90%, probably 20 kids, 90% of them, whatever color I said first, that's the color they chose, because there was this set, and it was quick too, right? So there was this sense, I think, of they wanted to get it right. So then I had them come through again, and I just said choose. I didn't even say the color. I just said choose. And what was interesting was how much longer it took them to decide, right? So I had to give them space to decide, as long as it didn't take too long because there were more of them. But it was very interesting when they didn't have that cue from me as
Mm.
to, kind of planting a seed for what I wanted from them. They had to reflect inward a little bit. And, and it was really interesting. So then I followed it up a couple weeks later, just asking kids what their favorite flavor ice cream was. And, and I didn't give them any selections. I just, and they would sit and they'd think for a second. But when they answered, they were sure. Like they knew what their favorite ice cream was, and they would tell you, and they were firm on that, and if you ask them, well, why do you like that flavor? They're like, because I like it. It tastes the best. That's it. It was just so there's no justification, there's no defending. Never would they ask what your favorite ice cream was. They're too egocentric at that age. But it was just kind of interesting. So it speaks to what you're saying, Bill. There's, as a teacher, we've always found that we have to remember we are awakened guides. Our job is we've just walked a path more frequently than they have, but we have to pay very close attention to what's catching their attention and guide them, in a way that keeps that curiosity engaged, and sometimes they don't give you very good information, so that can be hard to do. So you're guessing, but that's okay. They're cool with that too. They like it when you're wrong. They like it when you can't figure things out. And then that's half the game is figuring it out together.
Hmm. To that point, Ken, I have a friend who, when her little boy was young, she literally did a whole wall in her kitchen of whiteboard. And
Mm,
every time he had a question, they would write it down on the whiteboard. And it's just like, and then they would look up the answer, like, yes, it was
mm,
before phones, and it was before, like, or, well, it wasn't before phones, but it was like tech wasn't so big.
right.
But they would then look up the answer together, and it was just like this game, like, they would just have this, you'd go into the house and they'd have this whole wall
Hmm.
of questions that came up over, like, over a few days. And it was just, I loved it because it was just this idea of really cultivating that curiosity, and the fact that you know you could look up something and you could investigate it and you can decide what the answer was or whatever. So it was just a really sweet idea. I thought, I love that, I want to do that in my house. Of life questions.
Yeah, you know what else is cool about that is there's a lot of times we have difficulty resting in the tension of an unresolved question, or a question that doesn't have a definitive answer. So just being able to sit with questions like that. I mean, if you think about it, look at, like, listen to any politician right now. They're not asking difficult questions. They're posing something as a question that really gives you either this will happen or that will happen. And if you vote for me, this will happen. And if you want this to happen, then you need to vote for me. If you want that to happen, there's something wrong with you and you're not like me and you should really change your mind. you know?
Or vote for me and don't vote for him, and we'll keep that from happening. Yeah.
Right, yeah, but either way, it's like they simplify it, like the slogans and all that kind of stuff, where it's like, let me boil it down so that, we don't have to consider the difficult situation of this being, there may be second and third order consequences. We don't want to think that way. It's stressful for us.
Yeah.
It's just, and it's part of it's not our fault, it's just our design.
Well, you want to play a little game with me? I want to illustrate what we're talking about here with regard to the young people. All right. So I'm going to ask one question, and then I'd like you to give a one-word answer or a two-word answer if it's a two-word answer. Everybody in?
Yep.
What's your favorite color?
Purple.
I knew that.
Everybody
Yeah.
knows that.
Green.
Green. Okay.
Green.
Green. Okay, great. So now, how old were you when somebody asked you the first time what your favorite color was?
I always go, if there's something I came into the world with, it's purple because
I guarantee there was an event that occurred,
I,
Lisa.
but I every time if I had a question of like, I picked my favorite football team, so because I watch football with Dad, and
You're a
it's
Viking
because
fan, right?
purple, and yeah, the Vikings, and I've stuck with it.
Baltimore,
I didn't know, not Baltimore.
purple and black. Yeah.
They're more blue. Um,
So you don't
anyway,
have a recollection of the first time that you would have acknowledged purple being your favorite color?
no, and I've convinced myself if I came in that way, like God
I
put
get
that
it.
in me and threw me into
So,
the planet and said, you have at least that.
so is that something you believe, or is that something you're standing for?
I probably, I believe it.
I get it.
I don't care if I don't think anybody would care if I stood for it.
All right, excellent. So all of the rest of us are green. So Ken, how old were you that you recall the first time you said that green is my favorite color?
16.
Wow.
No, it was when I was younger, I liked blue.
You're a turncoat.
Yeah,
Well, at
I
least you came
shifted.
over to the
But
right side.
and
right?
honestly, my honest answer now, my favorite color is really earthy colors. Like, so there are greens, there are browns, there are deep blues, all that I find equally appealing. So, but I read a poem by Robert Frost called Nature's First Green is Gold.
Yeah.
And I started seeing green differently after that. Interestingly enough, it was like just that kind of attracted me. And then green just became something that resonated with me on a lot of different levels. And, so it was a color I would choose. So, and it's still probably the most dominant color I would choose at this point in my life, but I don't know that I really have a favorite color anymore. Earth colors.
Great. And Jan?
I've also changed because when I would have said purple probably when I was younger. And my color affinity changed once I learned about the chakras and
There you go.
what they mean and everything. And then green became truly significant for me because it's the color of the heart, the heart chakra. So that was like, that seemed like, I don't know if I was going to paint something or wear something, I would wear green necessarily. But when I have to feel the color, and I think that's a great way for me to put it, when I have to feel the color, I want to feel green.
So let me, without putting too fine a point on it, I think these are wonderful stories, all three of you. Thank you. And did you ever play Chutes and Ladders when you were a kid?
Oh yeah.
Do you remember each one of the pieces was a different color? The one that would represent you going up and landing on different things and sliding down the chute or getting the ladder and going up. You could have as many as 6 people playing, right? And roll the dice and all that. And there were 6 different colors, just so you could tell each other apart. So guess what color I always was in any game ever? Green. And the first time I remember someone asking me what my favorite color was, it was my aunt when she was 19 years old and she came to visit us. And I was probably about 4.5. And I said, of course, it's green. I mean, how can it be anything else? So that left, since I took green, my younger brother David took blue, and then Tommy took yellow, and Diane took red, and brown for Chris, for Laura, and then Christy was white. And not necessarily because and those might not even be the colors of the little plastic thingies in Chutes and Ladders. It's just that once somebody in the family had taken the color, it was no longer available for adoption. So everybody had to have their own color. So we were like, setting up our own future gangs. I'm the gang of green, and I'm going to go see if I can find some other green people out in the world. But no, the funny part of it is, to this day, I question it, and I can, like you, I have a favorite color too. I call it God sky. My favorite color is when the sun is going down and you've got greens, purples, yellows, reds on the cloud. That whole thing, that all together, it evokes a really powerful response, and it's all there. And so that's one of the reasons I love sunsets in Florida, because it was rewarding as all get out. Probably a dozen times a month, you would get God sky. And I took great pictures, out the back, window of my house for one of the sliding glass doors. But if I think about it, being the oldest, I always got to choose first, right? Before the other kids had language, we played a game, and if there was a colored something in it, I'm the green guy. And then I got to money, but I got my first money when I was about 4 or 5. And then that set up another set of habits.
Of greenness.
Yeah. So anyway, what's the empowerment that you can derive, or you can imply, or you can actually put into believing something or standing for something? Is it possible to create an empowering dynamic to believing and standing for something?
I think for me anyway, it's just there's a martial arts reminder that I think sums it up. We would always say, you are not here to serve the art is here to serve you.
Yes.
And it was a reminder that don't do this because someone's telling you to. If it isn't working for you, then let it change to adapt to you rather than the other way around. So I think as long as you're not serving your beliefs are serving you, I think that you'll be mostly okay.
That's powerful. And that also implies a distinction for stand for me. We in the training that I took in the 1990s, being the champion of a noble cause was a distinction to be really looked into and understood. Who cares what the noble cause is? Something greater than ourselves. And then that stand creating the possibility that being used in service of that stand, and having that stand be something that's bigger than you and me, that always there was something to fall back on. And for instance, when you have kids, the world changes in a very powerful way. There's the time after your firstborn is here, and I don't know about you, but I had no recollection what life was like before that firstborn. A year later, it was almost as if Heidi'd always been here. Of course, she was in our speaking. We were always talking about how many kids we were going to have. Funny enough, we talked about having 2 boys. We ended up with 2 girls. Not a huge breakdown. We worked around it. I mean, that's a joke. I mean, we were so blessed after being together for 5 years. But the point is that in what you said, Ken, the point of taking a stand is something that you then that's bigger than your life, that your life can then expand inside of, as opposed to being in service of your beliefs, or having your having your beliefs serving you. That's one side of the coin. The stand side of the coin is to choose a big enough conversation to continuously grow and develop inside of for the rest of your life.
I think because of my spirituality and my curiosity too, like that has allowed me to listen to and read and attend and be able to figure out what resonates with me and leave the rest, like you said. So I'm not letting it, create me. I'm letting it help me create me. So like Ken said, you can just not let it not go from that perspective. So I think that talent and ability and actually desire to learn something from everything and be curious about it and see how it resonates with your like go deep into your core beliefs like we've been talking about, and then go from there. Because I think people shut off too easily, like things, because there's some negative connection, or seemingly negative connection from their perspective. So I like to just listen to all things, and then decide, and then incorporate that into my being, so to speak.
Yeah.
The other thing, just from a military science perspective, when you take a stand, sometimes you have to give ground, you have to lose battles, because that's the best way forwards. So, and I think sometimes people get, they take a stand, they want to speak up, they want to speak out or advocate or whatever it is. And sometimes it's actually in the end not beneficial. It may feel satisfying in the moment, but that doesn't necessarily mean long term it's the best thing to do. And knowing whether it is or not sometimes is really just becoming skillful from making a mistake and looking at it in hindsight. I can think of times where I got a little fierce and damaged, a potential relationship. And looking back, I should have been a little bit more artful in, and not quite have been so firm in expressing my thoughts that early on,
Yes.
when there wasn't trust. And so who knows? And maybe, those relationships wouldn't work out anyway. But if you just like sever it right at the beginning, if maybe that's appropriate, but maybe it's not. And sometimes you have to give up the ground because it's the only way forwards. And if you don't, everybody dies on the hill. And how is that, like,
Mhm.
yeah.
That limits the future possibilities when everybody dies on the hill somehow.
Yeah, it does. And it can feel very glorious, and it can be a great story of sacrifice and martyrdom and whatever else. But
I'll never
is it
know.
really the strong thing to do? It's and again, it's such an interesting thing, because who knows, and you play armchair quarterback or look back on it all you want, but you don't really know. We're just kind of doing the best we can.
Well, metaphorically speaking, sorry, Jan, I just want to get this in. Metaphorically speaking, we use that kind of language like dying and killing off and all that. It's language, and we're talking about killing off relationships or speaking. So it's not true. It's not in fact. It's virtual. But sorry, Jan.
No, it's okay, because what I was thinking of what both Lisa and Ken were saying. And in yoga, we always say that in the style I practice, that you have an internal blueprint that you work from. And so when you work from that internal blueprint, but sometimes it's kind of like, what is that internal blueprint? It's kind of like, and that's where the trial and error, what Ken reminded me of. It's kind of like going too far and saying, okay, this was a mistake, and then and getting injured in the process or something, and then you kind of step back, and then the wisdom comes when eventually what, certain things maybe you should not do. And then you say, okay, well, I have a choice here to make. Like, I can do it. And, I mean, for me, I love to backbend, but it's really not good for me. And I can backbend from here to tomorrow, but I know the consequences, which are going to be long, long and painful afterwards. And I have to make a choice of like, is it worth that 5 seconds of like, oh my gosh, this, compared to like, 2 months of pain afterwards. And so I think that internal blueprint, which is a test, and then, which is sort of like you learn and you kind of discern after a while of like, okay, this is what I need to do, and this is not.
It's a perfect example. And you know what I found out my belief is? My
Mhm.
response to you saying, should I do this backbend, was I could watch you do a backbend. There are not many backbends in my future. Let's just put that's where my thinking was going. But since we're getting close to the end of the hour, I would like to put something out in the space that I've found pretty empowering this week. And I think I shared it with you folks on text, but I would, this is right up Ken's alley, okay, in terms of bringing your best game to every single conversation and constituting yourself at the beginning of the conversation the rules of the game, even if you don't talk them out with the other person. However, Ben Shapiro is a guy that I enjoy listening to because he's a student of the world, and I believe that he's got everybody's best intentions at heart. In this one quote, for me, kind of sums up where he comes from. And he says, when my wife comes to me and says, honey, I've got a problem, before he says anything, he says, okay, is this a listening conversation, or is this a conversation about something you would like me to fix? And I got to tell you, if you stop and think about how all the times that we've gotten engaged with somebody and listening for the solution to give them and all the rest of it, wouldn't it have been good information to know that, no, I just would really like to get this off my chest in front of somebody? Would that be okay? I don't know. What would be other ways that you could use that sort of thought process to prepare and condition the ground upon which the conversation will take place, so that such that it's totally empowering and totally free and totally in that trust zone that we were talking about, Lisa?
And that's actually from Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. He says the same kind of thing, that's when men hear a question, they think they have to fix something. Or when you just speak to usually like a husband and wife. So if the wife comes home and speaks, he thinks he has to fix something. So she should say, I just want to download. I want to vent. I don't need you to fix anything. So that goes along exactly with what he said.
He's a smart man, and I know that almost everything he says came from somewhere else, and he will tell you that, okay? This isn't his own thinking. He's not making this stuff up, But my other famous corollary, which goes back to the difference between men and women, is that one that we heard many different ways growing up through the 80s and the 90s. It went something like this. If a man says something and there is no woman there to hear him, is he still wrong?
Yes.
I like that one too.
So I mean, that one could be another whole podcast or a series of podcasts. Or maybe that would be a title, Eric, of a new podcast that we're going to do and talk about how communication is so important at just such a fundamental level. But anyhow, we've done it again, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate your company and love you profusely. If anything were to happen to me in the meantime, I want you to know that, okay?
There you go.
Okay. So, any last thoughts before we wrap this up and we kiss our listeners goodbye?
Apply childhood wonder to your adulthood.
Amazing.
That's a good one to end on to me.
All those in favor? All right.
Yeah, I guess I would second it and say live like a pet, because they're truly in the present moment. So
yes, they are.
Yeah, be in the present moment and stay curious.
That's fantastic. All right, y'all, we are lighting the candle, a world that works, and we've just spent another glorious hour together chatting to maybe hopefully give you something to grab onto out there to make your day just a little bit more enjoyable, a little bit more empowering. So bye-bye for now.
Have a good week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.